Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Today we are going to take another little trip down memory lane. One of our shows from a couple weeks ago was about record stores and the importance of record stores in the music community and sort of historically and where those things stand now. And tonight we're going to talk about the clubs, the kind of legendary clubs in the Akron area where a lot of bands nationally came to play and where a lot of the local bands that went on to some version of notoriety.
Yes,
ended up playing and gathering an audience. And it's hard not to wax nostalgic about this because it was kind of a different time. People, I hate to sound like the old man here, but I guess I am the old man. And it was like people then went out on the weekends or even on the weekdays to see bands play, and you had big crowds on a regular basis at clubs. And I kind of, I'm glad I experienced that in my own music career. And I kind of feel bad for a lot of young musicians now who it's so hard to get people just to, leave their house and come out. They're at home on their phones or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I know it's boring talk, but it's basically like to get out and actually go to a club and see bands play. And of course, the pandemic didn't help any of this. That made it even worse. No. My time here in Akron, it begins a bit after Nick's time because Nick is a lifelong resident here. And with the Bizarros and his experiences, I thought we'd let him start with some of the clubs that I know are very famous and very sort of have legends about them, but I actually did not get to go to those clubs. So, Nick, what are the couple of ones that come to mind to you?
Well, the most obvious one, the most notorious one is the Crypt. It was right across from Goodyear Tire headquarters. Actually, the Ganley Mercedes is right there where it used to be now, on East Market Street. And basically, it was only open in 76 and 77. It wasn't quite 2 years, but such great stuff happened there, good music. But it was owned by a Goodyear tire rubber worker, an employee. And there was the famous strike that was noted that happened in 76. The URW went on strike, and Goodyear being, the main rubber company that started. It was involved there. The couple of the guys in the Rubber City Rebels, Buzz Click and Rod Firestone, were looking for places for their band, the Rubber City Rebels, to play, and they were canvassing certain bars, and they went into the Crypt and had their sales pitch about, my band could do this, bring all these people in. And after a lengthy conversation, a bartender who was also the owner basically said, well, how about just taking this place over? And that's what happened. Just like on a handshake deal, the Rubber City Rebels were in the club business.
Now, did they bring in bands from nationally bands? Or?
No, well, bands that became nationally, like the Dead Boys and Devo later, but it was basically at the beginning it was them and the Bizarros and a few other bands that were local at the time. I don't think Tin Huey played there, but we were doing Thursday nights down in the flats at the Pirates Go with Perubu, and we brought them over.
In Cleveland.
Yeah. We brought Perubu over to play the Crypt. and Devo was pretty regular there. It was funny though. The owners basically said Devo brought a large crowd in, but they didn't make any money because they drank orange juice. It wasn't like a heavy drinking crowd.
Right.
And then the Dead Boys became regular. And if you have a copy of that book, The Akron Sound, there's like a rehash of a New Year's Eve event there that where supposedly the Cheetah Chrome of the Dead Boys wanted to punch Mark Mothersbaugh out for some slight, But I guess there's two sides to that story. But it happened that night, New Year's Eve. Anyway, it was a small place. It didn't smell very good, but it was a lot of fun.
Is that where the Bizarros first played, or did you have?
Well, we played a party first, and I think that's the first bar that we played at, first club.
Mm-hmm.
And we had we couldn't find a drummer, and we would have played there a lot more often, but we were drummerless for quite a while.
Yeah. Now, the first show that Unit 5, the band that I was in, actually we were known as the Vapors at the time. First show that we ever played was at the Robin Hood in Kent, and that was actually with you guys, the Bizarros. We opened for you, and you guys kind of, it was one of those sort of like mama bird pushing the chick out of the nest. I don't know if we were totally ready to play yet or not, but we played there, and that club, a lot of different bands played at the Robin Hood over the years, but that place is gone now.
Yeah.
It's been gone for a number of years, I believe.
Demoed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, how about other clubs that come to mind to you, Nick?
Well, you're going to talk a little bit about the Bank, which was very, very, very important. It lasted longer than some of these other clubs. Mm-hmm. But for a brief period, I think it was 1979, there was a bar on East Market Street called Ramones, and changed ownership. It became the nightclub. And we talked to the owners. And
they put a lot of thought into that name.
Yeah. They gave the Bizarros Monday nights, which was their slowest night, and it was during the winter. So the nightclub had local new wave music there for almost a year. We had Chai Pig play with us, Teacher's Pet, a few other bands, and that, like I said, that lasted, I'd say, maybe 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
But and then I would have mentioned a place that I was too young to go to in its heyday. It was called the Draft House, but then in the late 70s, it changed its name to the Flying Machine, and that's where it was in Portage Lakes in Green Township, and that's where I got to see the Ramones with the Runaways, Captain Beefheart, of all places, And then when I was doing some research for the show today, Cheap Trick played there also. But that wasn't really a club where local bands played. It's just something you could, that in the glory days of where you could see Captain Beefheart or the Ramones, not too far from your home. It's pretty amazing.
I've heard people talk about Rory Gallagher playing there, too.
Oh, no. That was and some of the people that are older there, this is a bowling alley in the Barberton Norton area.
Oh, okay.
And I think it might have been called the Lion's Den.
That sounds right, yes.
And man, that was a heck of a show.
Yeah.
There was, he must have sweated like 10 gallons, and he just played with his guitar that looked like it was a million years old, no finish on it.
Yeah, he had that beat up Stratocaster. I remember that. Yeah. It was like a badge of honor for him, I think.
Once again, I don't think that was a place where local bands that did their own. See, there were a lot of clubs in the area that had bands all the time. Mm-hmm. But as far as the kind of what I was into, with like you two, were bands that did original music. Mm-hmm. We're just talking about the ones that had that.
Right. Well, that was, I don't know if it's so much the case now or not, but that was a real dividing line amongst bands that played back in the 70s and 80s, was sort of like if you did your own music or not, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of the bands that were the biggest bands, the most popular bands, didn't do their own music at all. They did all cover songs. They played all the hits of the time. And and so there was like those guys, and then there was like us, who were playing our own music, and it always seemed like, I don't know, we were like in two different worlds. We never really overlapped at all.
What's weird too is there's a bit of an overlap. Like when first time I saw, not to keep talking about Captain Beefheart, but when I first saw him at the Agora, it could have been 69 or 70. Two Cleveland cover bands opened for him.
Wow, okay.
So, I mean, it's the way things were.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And there were probably more people there to see them. Like Rain Tree, I can't think of the other band's name. More people there to see them than him.
Yeah, I heard I had some friends the other day talking about some band called Love Affair. Do you remember
They
this
were
band?
huge in Cleveland.
And apparently they were really big. And,
Huge.
And then it was like, and there was some argument about were they any good or not. I don't know these guys. If they're out there listening, I'm sorry. I'm not don't mean to be the least bit derogatory, but it was funny because one person was saying like, well, whatever you think of them, they did a great Led Zeppelin set. And I was like, oh, brother.
And as far as the nightclub and the flying machine were like incidental. They weren't really important in the grand scheme of things, but they were there.
I keep hearing about the flying machine, though, and it's actually, I live out in the Portage Lakes area, and it was out that way, right? It was on 619.
Yeah, 619. I wonder if it's in some incarnation, it's still there.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Couldn't be a bar.
Right.
You know about that.
Yeah, well, how dare you? This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and we're kind of taking a little trip down memory lane, remembering some of the important clubs and venues that bands played here locally, and sometimes national bands came to play as well. Now, Nick, is it time to talk about the bank, or do you have something else? Do you want to?
No, it's time to talk about the bank, but I just want to put my part in there about bringing Paul Schrader in.
Oh, yeah,
and he actually
sure.
got to see you.
Right. Well, let me talk about the bank. So and then we'll get to you.
Yeah.
So the bank is probably the most legendary / notorious music club that Akron's had in many years.
And it was there for a few years, so it had a lot of history.
Right, exactly. It actually lasted, as opposed to a lot of these clubs you're mentioning, which maybe were lucky to make it a year. The bank actually hung around for several years. But the bank got its name because it was literally in an old bank. And this was on right on Main Street. Today, the ballpark is there. The Rubber Ducks Stadium is where that was located. And connected to the bank was a old hotel, the Anthony Wayne.
Oh, yeah.
Which was at one time quite a luxurious hotel. By the time that we got around to it and it became the bank, which would be in the late 1970s, things weren't quite as luxurious. I remember some of the lights being out on the Anthony Wayne. It said Honey Wayne. We always called it the Honey Wayne. And it was basically fairly destitute people were living there. And then the bank nightclub, as mentioned, had been like a central office for a major banking firm, and so it was a really kind of fantastic place. I mean, it had a huge ceiling. It was very, very large, lots of marble. There was towards the back, a huge walk-in safe where
Vault,
for vault. Yes, exactly. For, the money or whatever that they were keeping there.
Even a great balcony.
Yeah. And a balcony. I mean, it was just, you'd walk in. I'm going to try to set the picture.
Yeah.
You'd walk in and to the immediate right was the stage. And I'll get to the stage again in a second. In front of you, going all the way down the wall, was the bar. There were a bunch of tables there. There were pinball games and stuff towards the back. And then the bathrooms were upstairs. And you had to go to up this balcony, and that's where the bathrooms were. And then there were these old offices that were back there, and those were off limits, but the bands could hang out there. And eventually a whole lot of people did, because the place pulled in a lot of people. I mean, it was not unusual for there to be 400, 500, 600 people there on a given weekend night. And those offices, velvet curtains and stuff.
Yeah.
It was just really bizarre, and big old couches, all that old furniture that had been part of, the president of the bank or whatever. It was all still there. Now the stage was fairly elevated. I mean, when I think a lot of clubs, you usually think of the stage being about 3 or 4 feet up, but this was about, I'd say, about 6 feet up, and then. As a drummer, what I always recall was that there was a drum riser that was even further up, and behind that drum riser was nothing. There was there was just this gaping abyss, and it was like total darkness. And I think back upon those days when I used to play there, and it's like, I mean, my drum throne, or as they call it, or drum stool, it was like, the legs of it were only like an inch or two away from one step backward, I'd be like tipping back into this, who knows what was down there. I used to fear it. It seemed like there could have been anything down under that stage. But anyway, the place was really fun to play. I remember the first time we played there, it was disorienting because I would hit the drums, and in this huge marble walled facility, you'd get this immediate reverb back slap from the drum. So I'm hitting the drum like bop, and then I'm hitting pop coming back at me, and it was like, how am I going to keep time with this? It was crazy. But they eventually put in a huge parachute. Do you remember that?
That was great.
Yeah, they put this big parachute hanging from the ceiling.
I think it was
to muffle the sound. Yeah. But the origins of the club are interesting as well. It was run by a guy named Howard Allison, and his original idea for the club was to be a jazz club. And he had some big names in, brought to Akron. I mean, Dexter Gordon, and who's, one of the great tenor sax players ever, and the fantastic Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers played there. But apparently he wasn't really able to make much money. I don't know. I guess maybe he had to pay these artists so much, and he wasn't getting enough money back from the bar or whatever. So in a very similar scenario as to what you said about the Rubber City Rebels at the Crypt, my understanding is the band Hammer Damage, which weirdly enough were the son of Rubber City Rebels. They were, there were people from Rubber City Rebels that ended up forming the band Hammer Damage. They talked to Howard at the bank and said, how about we come and play on Thursday nights? We can promise that we'll bring you a big crowd. And
at that point, they had the biggest draw of any of the local bands. The Hammer Damage drew a lot of people. Right, yes. And so Howard said, yeah, why not? And then, as you say, they brought a lot of people in. So eventually he was like, well, forget his first love of jazz. He's just going to book these local Akron bands to play there. And it worked out for him for quite a while, business-wise. Weekends were something.
Oh, yeah, they were huge. It was crazy. But yes, and to your point about Hammer Damage, I've always long maintained that for a roughly 6-month period, Hammer Damage was one of the best bands in America. They had charisma, they had the songs, they had like a perfect
charisma in the songs.
Yeah, they had a perfect 40-minute set,
Yeah.
But as often happens,
girls liked them.
Yeah, the girls liked them, right? They were cute. So they were great. And
I took them to New York twice. I did Clone Records nights and
with Unit 5, yeah.
They were just a great band. They should have made it.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's somehow, like as often happens, things fell apart personally or whatever. And their lead guitar player, the late George Cabanis, he left and went on to do Color Me Gone and some other things. I think he played with the Dead Boys for a while.
Absolutely.
So, but be that as it may, yeah, for that certain period, they were a really terrific band. Never captured on a recording, though. I don't think. I don't think. I mean, there is a recording. They're on Bowling Balls too. They have a song and
They
stuff.
had a single, too.
Yeah, they had single, but I know. I don't think that was ever quite captured how good they were live.
You had to see them live.
Yeah,
it's like you guys actually.
Yeah, probably that's true. Yeah, but anyway, so Hammer Damage played there. Eventually, Unit 5 we played there on a regular basis. Tin Huey did some very big shows there. Chai Pig was a regular. Yeah,
regular.
Yeah,
they did fantastic there.
Yeah, The Action was another band that played. All of the sort of Akron sound bands of the late 70s, early 80s were regulars there at the bank. And there's just a lot of funny stories about the place. I mean, I'll drop a name here, but a friend of mine, Durf, John Backdurf, the comic artist, he has a graphic novel called Punk Rock in Trailer Parks, and a lot of that is set at the bank at a mythical performance by the Ramones. They never actually played there, but he sets it up that they did. But I actually kind of helped him with that because it was, in terms of figuring out what the layout of the club was, but it brought back to me also just a lot of famous stories about the place. I mean, they were kind of legendary for watering the drinks down. This was like well known that that was almost part of the bartender's duty
I
before
just
they opened.
Strohs. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, that was the thing. You needed to be safe doing it that way. And we would play the band Unit 5 and other bands too, but Unit 5 would play their Friday and Saturday nights, both. And so we played there regularly enough that we kind of had this deal with them where we could just leave our stuff set up. We didn't have to tear down all the drums and amps and everything and, just to bring them back the next night. And when you did that, you ended up going in the next day through the Honey Wayne, the Anthony Wayne, and that was always a little creepy. And you went in through this back way. And I remember very distinctly going in, on a late afternoon where we were going to play on that Saturday. Or no, I'm sorry. We had played Friday and Saturday both, and it was the Sunday because we had said, can we just leave our stuff here because it was so late. It was 2:30 in the morning or whatever. We'll come back Sunday afternoon and we'll tear our gear down. And yeah, they were fine with that. So we go in on this late Sunday afternoon. And I remember going up to the bar, and of course there's no one there working or anything, and there's the glass there that I had been drinking out of. I remember distinctly where I was sitting, and that was the glass. And I'm looking at the glass, and I'm like, this thing is filthy. I was drinking.
You saw it. Yeah. It was blue light for that. You could just see.
It was very disturbing experience.
Yeah.
But you were mentioning about a famous writer and director that came to the bank once.
Oh yeah, I got a phone call at some point. A representative of writer director Paul Schrader, and he was
probably most famous for writing the screenplay for Taxi Driver.
Yeah, and also Raging Bull.
Raging Bull as well.
And he actually directed the movie that it was just in the theaters right then, American Gigolo.
Right.
And then
he's still making movies.
He's just one's getting released soon on Magnolia Films.
Okay.
But anyway, he was thinking about making a movie in the area on Midwest music. So he wanted to get together with me and scout the area around. So sure, So for like a week and a half, I would take him to various bars to see local bands, and then in the evening he went with I think the Cleveland band called the Generators did the same in the Cleveland area, and he wound up choosing to go with the Cleveland group, and the movie he was working on became just around the corner from the end. What was it? Just around the corner from the end of day or the time of day?
It was Light of Day.
Yeah, just around the corner
with Michael J. Fox
and Joan Jett.
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah.
But anyway, we spent a lot of time in Akron drinking Strohs and going to different bars. He was from Detroit, and Blue Collar. We were talking about that movie Blue Collar that he had done, wrote and directed, and how he wanted. There was a scene in there at a bar where he wanted a display of. Now it's called product placement of Strohs, and the company wouldn't give. He had to buy it. Wouldn't give it to him for free. Anyway, we decided to go to the bank one night. I wanted to show him some local bands, and Unit 5 were there. But also Klaus Naumi. You got to describe him.
You're right. We'll get to him in a minute.
Yeah. So we're sitting me and Paul Schrader and his assistant, we're in a balcony with this overlooking this surrealistic view. It was the parachute, and Klaus Naumi, he had the makeup on and wearing a tutu, singing opera in a really high voice.
Right. Right.
But anyway, that was my my.
That's probably not what Paul Schrader was looking for.
No. He didn't enjoy that.
He was looking more for a working class Midwest band.
Yeah, art. I mean, New York art in Akron just wasn't what he was there to see.
Well, that was one of the most legendary shows at the bank was Klaus Naumi, and he played a couple times there.
It was ongoing.
Yeah,
he played a few times.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. You're right. It was. Unit 5 played with him once. I think Chai Pig usually opened. We might even both have played with him. But for those who don't know, Klaus Naumi, and there's actually a terrific documentary about him called The Naumi Song. But Klaus Naumi was a German performance artist who basically his stick, if you will, if you'll let me use that phrase or that word, was basically that he was sort of an alien. Sort of David Bowie-esque in a way of the Ziggy Stardust era. He had a very unique look. As Nick mentioned, he dressed in this sort of futuristic space garb that
ballerina
but kind of a ballerina thing as well. And he had this huge widow's peak, and his hair was pulled way back. A lot of makeup, and he sang in sort of a falsetto,
real high,
and very high. But he actually was a fantastic singer. I mean, but he performed to tape recordings, which at the time was like no one had ever seen anything like that. Absolutely. And so, he would come out on stage after Unit 5 or Chai Pig, doing our Midwest Paul Schrader rock. And all of a sudden, the lights go down and there's all this smoke machine and everything. And then it's this very visual extravaganza and him appearing out of the smoke and with a spotlight on him. And he'd sing these songs to this recorded or like orchestral accompaniment, with strings and synthesizers.
Nobody would expect to walk into a bar in Akron on it was the middle of the week. It was like a weekend.
Right. To
see that.
Yeah.
Visually, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The extent of his connections, I'm not 100% clear about. I know that there's a famous local collector of music, Jimmy Image. I know that Jimmy was very close to Klaus, and I don't know if there was some connection there, but however it happened, he seemed to love Akron. Yeah. I mean, he really enjoyed it here, and he made a lot of connections and friends here. And, tragically, Klaus Naumi was one of the very first people of note to die of AIDS. Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, when he died, it was the gay cancer. They didn't even know. They didn't have the name for it yet. Yeah. And that was very sad. But, I mean, he was, when he wasn't performing, he was always a distinctive looking person, but, he would be out of the makeup and he would be dressed in a sort of more conventional way. And, I remember hanging out with him just a little bit. I was not close to him in any way, but I remember he was always very friendly and just seemed to really love Akron. So it was a bizarre, bizarre connection somehow. And there's another, just also for people who might be interested in him, he famously was on Saturday Night Live with David Bowie. And there was a performance where David Bowie was in this suit that he actually couldn't move. And Klaus and another person in the backup band had to carry Bowie out to the microphone to sing his song. I think that's around the Scary Monsters era. I think it might have been like Ashes to Ashes, that song. But yeah, but so Bowie knew about him and championed him as well. There's 2 or 3 Klaus Nomi albums out there, and they're worth listening to. It's interesting music for sure.
Brad, that's probably not in the library here, right?
We do have Total Eclipse in the library.
No kidding.
We can play that one for sure.
Yep, there you go. Yeah. Awesome. So this is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and we are talking about some of the famous and infamous music venues and clubs that we either played at or saw bands at here in the Akron area. And having talked about the Bank, which was in downtown, again, that's probably one of the most legendary clubs of this area. But the other one that comes to mind is JB's in Kent. And when the Bank closed, JB's became sort of the de facto place for bands to play. So like, again, Unit 5 and Hammer Damage, a number of those bands all would play JB's. Now, there's an upstairs and a downstairs at JB's. And when we were playing there, we were downstairs. Upstairs was the house band, was the Numbers Band.
Yeah.
Who I believe actually had ownership at the club at that time, or they owned part of it, like they were partners or something. But they were there every weekend playing upstairs. And I remember Unit 5, we were kind of terrible. When I say terrible, what I mean is the way we acted with our audiences. Because we would go on so late. Anytime I'm at a show to this day, and I'm like, when is this band going to come on? I just think to myself, this is just my karma catching up with me, because we would be like, well, we're going to go on at 11 o'clock would come and be like 11:30. We'd go on at 12:30 half the time and play till 2:30. I mean, the lights would be on. Last call had happened. We'd still be playing. That was just routine. But
JB's went from being, they've been around for so long, and it was great. You got to see some great national band. Their local bands became national. Like I remember going there to see the James Gang. They were the house band for a while with Joe Walsh, and then a couple years later, the Raspberries were the house. They were there every Friday night for months. Then after that, Glass Harp was the Friday band for forever, And then, so it was like really an honor for a lot of us, to be playing the same.
There was
place.
a lot of history to that club. A lot of the bands that we'd grown up with that became big had been playing.
It was
there.
That place was always there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I remember with the Numbers Band, they'd be playing upstairs, and no matter how late we played, Unit 5 played, when we would be done, they were still playing.
Yeah, and it would still be packed. I mean,
it'd be like a drum solo. I'd hear a drum solo upstairs. I'm like, they're still at it?
Yeah. For a long time, the Numbers Band played a place next door called the Cove with a K, and it burnt down. There was a group of buildings that caught on fire, and after that, that's when the Numbers Band moved over to the left a bit to the JB's.
Yeah. The bands that played in the basement at JB's drew a very different clientele than the Numbers Band drew back at that time. Numbers Band were, at that time, they still are blues based, but they've moved on, now into
their own
jazz, their own style, which is really, impossible to describe. They're really amazing and terrific band, and they always have been. But in those days, they were much more blues based. And meanwhile, the bands down in the basement were more punk / new wave kind of bands. And so there would sometimes be some altercations between the audiences of these two bands. If the Numbers Band was taking a break and some of those guys would come down, they were more of a biker types, and they'd come down and see all these goofy kids and makeup and punky haircuts.
Our crowd got beat up.
Yeah, it happened. It happened. And I remember distinctly, I had a friend of mine from high school in Detroit, and he had ended up in the Peace Corps and had traveled to Africa, and he came to visit me, and it was at New Year's, and we were playing down in the basement, the New Year's Eve show, and Numbers Band upstairs, and the scenario I just described happened where they took a break and a bunch of these sort of biker guys come down, and we're playing at the time, and our singer, Tracy Thomas, was singing away, and she's dressed in a sort of a leotard thing, and she has these stiletto heels on, and one of these biker guys comes up and starts to kind of salaciously rub her ankle. And she ends up kicking him in the face. So this starts a whole brawl. And I remember distinctly hiding off to the side of the stage behind a tipped over table. And my friend is next to me, this guy who's been in the Peace Corps in Africa. And he looks at me and he says, "Are all your shows like this?"
Yeah. That was probably your most exciting one.
It was a very crazy thing. Yeah, that was not a typical night, but not. I mean, yeah, those kind of altercations would happen, like you said.
Yeah, I remember that for a couple years there, it was pretty common to have all the bands that we're talking about be regulars. Devo played there quite a bit too. I remember getting a phone call actually on Christmas Eve from the guy that was managing the downstairs part. One, if we could last minute, could a Bizarros play Christmas Eve? And I said, no. He goes, "Well, anybody else?" So I called Mother's Ball up. I said, "Hey, there's a gig of Devo wants it." And he called me back 20 minutes later. No, But I mean, seriously, it was it was a lot of the bands that that were, we call them the Akron Sound, were pretty much entrenched there after a while.
Yeah. And I don't know. We played there so many times, and yeah, I have basically fond memories of it. It was, I mean, with the most great music clubs, there was a slight dumpy quality to it. I remember the bathrooms routinely were overflowing.
I remember dropping a contact lens in the bathroom there, and I mean, I was brave enough to search for it, but when I was searching, these little fleas were jumping everywhere.
And there were trains that ran back behind it. Remember that too? That was another thing. There was occasional fatality because people would wander out there. And
see, I wonder if anybody remembers a brief club that was there for a while. It was called the Magic Theater. It was an old ballroom on Water Street. I actually saw Alice Cooper. There was the coolest place. You just sat on the floor, and it caught on fire too.
Yeah, really.
But there's a lot of historical, clubs and bars in Kent. But we're just discussing the ones that we had something to do with.
Right. Yeah. I also associate JB's, for what it's worth, with being part of why I ultimately was ready to stop playing out, because we played out on one winter night, and it was just freezing. It was near zero, and there was a ton of snow. And like I said, it was partially our own fault, but it's 2:30 before we're done. By the time we pack up, had to carry all that stuff up those stairs and to pack up into our van and stuff. And I go out to my car, and I'm trying to clear off the car and all the ice and stuff. And the outside rear view mirror just snapped off, I guess, from being so frozen. And I just remember sitting there, and it was 3:30 in the morning, and I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this.
Well, I remember those nights like that when we had the Monday nights at the nightclub, and it was probably one of the worst winters in Akron history. And we had to take a PA that day, a huge PA we never used to, but we did. We rented a U-Haul and a trailer. And after everything was done, because we got paid the door, I think we split like $4.50. After pushing our car, taking the trailer back.
Yeah, right, exactly. But a lot of as you were saying though, I mean, it's funny some of the people that played at JB's. Before we move on to a couple other clubs here, I remember Bo Diddley played there, and Unit 5 was playing the same night, and I was like, I kept like sneaking upstairs to see him play, and Numbers Band opened for him, then he played, and of course it was great.
One of the coolest memories I have of the bank was went to see the Clash at the Civic Theater.
Yeah,
and after the show, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. Maybe the Rubber City Rebels opened. No, it was
for the Clash.
No, yeah, it wasn't.
It was Curtis Blow.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was Curtis Blow. Anyway, after the show, after the Clash, everybody just went to the bank, and you guys were playing.
Mm-hmm.
That was a cool night.
Yeah, but we did. I saw the Clash show too, though. Yeah.
I could never remember his name.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was an amazing show because that was when rap was just in its infancy.
Nobody,
and so people,
nobody knew what it was.
Yeah. And I remember, everyone was kind of like, "Well, this is a fad," shows what we knew. That's one of the most legendary shows in Akron ever was the Clash at the Civic Theater. That was a absolutely mind-blowing gig, and everyone that was there was just blown away by them. That was them at the height of their powers, I think. They were really a great show. And then, of course, like, the Waitresses with Chris Butler, they played at JB's. Unit 5 opened for them a couple times. And then later in the 80s, the Replacements played there.
Really?
Yeah. And Smithereens, and a number of other bands played there. Yeah, so kind of kept going in a great direction there for quite a while. Well, another place in Kent that was a fun to play was the Rathskeller. Now this was part of Kent State University and kind of their student center, and a number of bands played there many times. There would be Halloween parties and special events and things that we would play at.
That's where I first saw the Clampets.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Okay. And then occasionally they had some huge people play. Elvis Costello played there at the Rathskeller once. Yeah. Early in his career. But there was one Unit 5 show that I've always remembered, which was we were playing at the Rathskeller, and a ton of people there. And as we're playing, we're about 2 or 3 songs into our set, and this person comes up and they're in a wheelchair. And then there's like a second person. And then eventually there's about 15 or 20 people in wheelchairs, all kind of like around the stage. And Tracy Thomas, our singer, I'm playing the drums behind her, and in between one of the songs, she kind of looks at me and it's kind of like gives me this look like, this is odd, isn't it? And I'm like, I don't know what to, it's whatever, it's fine. So we went ahead and played our set, and then when we were done, I went over to the bar, and at the bar was Big Chuck, of Big Chuck and Houlihan fame, and later Little John fame. But and he's there, and he comes up to me, and he said, like, "Oh, you were in that band. You guys were really good and stuff." And I start talking to him, and I realized that he had been there for a charity wheelchair basketball game, and that's where all these people had come that were in the audience.
Was Little John there?
I'm thinking it might still be the Houlihan era, actually.
Oh,
yeah. But I don't remember seeing him, but I remember Big Chuck, and so he bought me a beer, and I'm there, and I'm talking to him, and I said, man, I just want to let you know, this is a real honor for me to meet you. You're like my hero. And the woman who would ultimately be my wife happened to be there with me. And I kind of looked back, and she's looking at me, and she's like, Big Chuck is your hero? I realized maybe I was fawning a bit too much there. But I was impressed. What can I say?
Well,
Chuck Shadowski, great man.
I made a bigger fool of myself in front of Jonathan Richmond many times trying to express my fondness for him. Mm-hmm. My wife just won't let me go near him anymore.
It seems like he wouldn't even know how to take a compliment like that, right? Like he just looked at you.
He just looked at his mouth open.
A couple other clubs that come to mind, I thought I'd mention real quick here. This is from Akron and beyond. And with my co-host, Nick Nicholas, I'm Bob Ethington. And we've been talking about some of the music clubs and venues here in the Akron area. And there's a couple I just want to mention quickly that I'd forgotten about until we started thinking about this. And one of them was a place called the Plum Cellar. Now, I've been working now with the Akron Summit County Public Library and the Summit County Historical Society on delving through a bunch of materials that have been collected that's going to be part of an Akron History Museum that'll be opening in probably next year, and we'll probably talk about that more in closer to that event. But I found this poster for like a show that Unit 5 played, and it was at the Plum Cellar, and I was trying to remember this place.
I never even heard of it.
Yeah, and it turns out my memory was stirred when I realized it was a place where it used to. It's on West Market in Fairlawn. It used to be a restaurant called The Mark. And then it became a Rockneys there in Fairlawn. But at the time, it was it was called the Plum or something Plum, and they had in the cellar in their basement, they called it the Plum Cellar. So upstairs was a regular restaurant, and downstairs was this club for bands. But the thing was, they always wanted the bands, like they didn't want the bands to go super late, so they wanted things to be closed by say midnight. So that meant the bands would start playing at 8 or 9 o'clock, and the restaurant was still open. And that's my biggest memory of this place, was we'd be playing, and someone, like a manager, would come down and say, "Can you guys keep it down?" Because there's people upstairs eating, and it's kind of like, well, you brought us here. We're a rock band. This is kind of how we play. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. But Anthony's Plum, that was the name of the place, Anthony's Plum. And then it was the Plum Cellar. It was in the basement. But I think that was just like a guy who was like probably Anthony, who was just a music fan. He was somebody who'd come to the bank and JB's. He knew the bank had closed, and he thought, well, here's a chance to have the bands play here, and maybe we can be successful with it as well.
We actually played a teen club in on Waterloo Road up there that used to be an old drugstore where the old Lynn Theater was.
Okay. You don't remember the name, do you?
No, it was that was really a brief place.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of, I guess, sort of the overarching narrative of this whole thing is the music business is a rough one, and it's hard to open a club and keep it open. And there's so many places that are famous, legendary clubs that just don't exist anymore, and you had to be there. And that still exists today. There's cool places that open up, and you hope they last. It's a hard road to go.
And in Kent, they had to build an audience with a college,
Right.
And the bars were like right down the street.
Right.
Akron, it was pretty impressive. They have that many kids from so many different parts of town come and see the bands. Yeah,
and I'm glad you brought that up, Nick, because that is something that hasn't been mentioned that deserves to be mentioned, is that at the time we're talking about, the late 1970s, early 1980s, downtown Akron was a very different place than it is now. It was tough. There was a lot of vacant buildings, there was a huge bank that had been completely vacated and turned into a music club, and that was not unusual. There were a lot of street people. It was a more, I don't want to overstate it. It was
a lot of boarded up buildings that were once beautiful, and now they're just
right. Yeah. Adult film. There was an adult film place right across from the bank. I remember. It was just a very different era, and yet, as you say, it attracted people from all over Summit County, Portage County to come to these shows. It was even from Cleveland, and we played a lot of shows here in Akron where Cleveland bands would open for us, and then we'd go to Cleveland and play, at the Pirates Cove or Peabody's, those kind of clubs up in Cleveland. We'd open for them, so there was a whole In fact, you mentioned the Generators. That was a band that we played with a number of times.
Yeah, we played with the Wild Giraffes.
Wild Giraffes, yeah. That was another really good band that kind of, yeah. I remember having a high regard for them, but kind of forgotten now. But anyway, this has been From Akron and Beyond. We've been talking about the music clubs of the past, the legendary places, and kind of reliving some old memories and telling some stories. Hope you enjoyed it. My co-host Nick Nicholas, and I'm Bob Ethington, and we'll see you next time.